One of the big banks just dropped a huge bombshell. And if you've been using trust to grow your property portfolio, this changes everything. For years, this particular bank was the best for trust lending, and investors effectively had unlimited borrowing capacity with it. But now, that's completely changing. If you don't understand how these policy shifts affect you, you could accidentally cap your own borrowing power without even realizing. I'm Stephen from Invest and Grow Property, and over the past several years, I've helped investors scale from 1 to 5 to 10 plus properties. In this video, I'm breaking down how borrowing capacity really works, why 99% of investors store after 4 properties, how this new major bank policy just shook up the entire market, and 3 smart plays you can use to help stay one step ahead as lenders tighten up. Let's get into it. Think of borrowing capacity like a bucket. Banks will only let you borrow up to a certain amount based on what they think that you can afford to repay. The formula lenders actually use involves taking your income and subtracting your living expenses and then further subtracting your existing loan repayments. They then add a buffer for interest rate rises. What's left determines how much more they'll lend to you. Now, most investors hit their limit after 2 to 3 investment properties because each new property adds debt. Your repayments increase, which reduces your capacity. Think of it like trying to fill that bucket when there's a hole in the bottom getting bigger and bigger with every property that you buy. But here's the thing, that hole can be plugged. Let me paint a picture of what typically happens. You buy your first investment property and the bank assesses your income, reviews the rent, and approves the loan. Great start. By property 3, your debt has compounded and your rental income isn't growing at the same rate in the bank's eyes. All of a sudden, you're starting to squeeze that bucket. By property 4, that's where most people are told they're completely maxed out. The problem is that every property that you buy under your personal name gets added to your total debt assessment. And eventually, even if your properties are performing well, generating rent, the bank will say no more. This is where most investors stop. They've assumed they hit the ceiling and that's it. But there's another way. That's exactly where a trust strategy comes in. A trust is essentially a separate legal entity. When you buy a property in the trust, that property and its debt sits within the trust. The key advantage here is that the lenders will exclude the trust when they assess your personal borrowing capacity, as long as the trust is self-sustaining, meaning it's breaking even or making a profit. You can also get an accountant's letter stating that the trust isn't relying on your income, and some lenders even let you self-declare. Suddenly, the property's debt disappears from your borrowing capacity and your bucket just got a whole lot bigger. Now, there is a catch with this strategy. You should never wait until you're maxed out to start using the trust. If you set up the trust when you've already hit your borrowing limit, you won't be able to get that next loan approved anyway. Because even though the trust is technically its own structure, your loan is still assessed based on your personal financial position, your incomes, liabilities, and serviceability. The advantage of the trust is simply that the debt from your existing investment can be excluded from the assessment. If you're thinking of building a portfolio of 8 to 10 properties over the next decade, you need to start structuring early. Think of it like building the foundation of a house. You can't add extra support beams after the house is built. You need to plan from the beginning. Now, not every property works in a trust for this strategy. Remember, the trust technically needs to be self-sustaining. That means you need properties with stronger rental yields. It was easier 3 years ago when you could find properties yielding 6 to 8%, which made them cash positive from day one. These days, most properties yield around 5% or less, which often means they're negatively geared, especially with current interest rates. If a property in your trust is negatively geared, meaning it's costing you money each month, you won't be able to get that accountant's letter. The trust isn't self-sustaining. And while some lenders do let you self-declare, are you really in a position to handle that negative cash flow? You also wouldn't get the same tax benefits from negative gearing as you would in your personal name. More on that later. But rents typically increase each year while your loan repayments stay relatively stable, especially as interest rates come down. So a property that's negatively geared today might eventually break even in 2 years and be positive by the 3rd year, which is why we always say that trust strategy is a long-term play. You set it up knowing when the numbers work in a few years, you'll be able to unlock that borrowing capacity. So now you're wondering if a trust structure is right for you. Well, ask yourself these 3 questions. Number 1, how many properties do you want to own? If your goal is 3 or 4 properties total, you can probably achieve that without a trust. You will just need to spread them across different lenders. In fact, most investors can get to 3 or 4 properties in their personal name with the right strategy. Now, unless you're making $1 million a year, a trust structure is a must if you're considering building a portfolio of 5 or 8 or more than 10 properties. Without it, you'll hit a wall that's very difficult to break through. Question 2, do you have enough capital? Trust works best for investors who have a decent amount of cash to start with. That's because you generally need a larger deposit to keep the trust neutrally or positively geared, meaning that it can pay for itself without relying on your income. For example, imagine someone with $1 million in cash, but only $500K of borrowing capacity left. They could strategically recycle that $500K to finance 8 to 10 properties by using their capital and keeping each property self-sustaining. But for most people, it's the opposite. They've got plenty of borrowing power, but the challenge is saving up that deposit. In that case, a trust structure might not be the best move right now until more capital is built up. Question 3, can you handle the complexities? A trust isn't a set and forget. There are trust setup costs of around $2,000 to $3,000 on top of annual accounting fees and tax returns, which cost approximately $2,000 per year. And you need to work with accountants and advisors who understand trust structures properly. If you're willing to invest in that level of planning and advice, then a trust can be incredibly powerful. If you're not, it might just further complicate things rather than provide value. Once you've looked into these 3 questions, you also need to consider the downsides of using these structures. Let's take a look. Trade-off number 1, you lose negative gearing benefits. When you buy a property in your personal name and it's negatively geared, you can offset that loss against your personal name for tax purposes. That's a tax benefit that many investors rely on. But when you're buying in a trust, you can't do that. If the trust makes a loss, that loss stays within the trust. You can't use it to reduce your personal tax. That's why a trust strategy works best with positively or at least neutral geared properties. You're sacrificing short-term tax benefits for long-term borrowing capacity growth. Trade-off number 2, upfront and ongoing costs. Setting up and maintaining a trust costs money. If you're only buying 1 or 2 properties, the costs might outweigh the benefits. But if you're scaling to 5, 8, 10 properties, those costs become negligible compared to the additional wealth that you're building. Trade-off number 3, capital gains tax works differently. Capital gains tax still applies when you sell a property in a trust, but you have flexibility around who receives the income within the trust. This can actually be a benefit, but it requires careful planning with your accountant. The key is understanding these trade-offs upfront, so you can make an informed decision and not regret your structure later. But if you plan on implementing this strategy, here's the wild part. The rules have just changed and it's turning everything on its head. One of the big 5 banks, let's just call it the one with the black logo, has quietly flipped the switch off. For years, investors could set up multiple trusts, self-declare them as self-sustaining, and buy multiple properties. They could do that all within the one bank, without those loans counting against their personal borrowing capacity. And get this, no accountant's letters were needed either. That meant you could build a serious portfolio, 5, 10, even 30 properties across multiple trusts or within this one bank. It was the holy grail for investors who knew how to cheat the borrowing game. But now that door's been shut. As of 29th of October 2025, this one bank has changed the policy and will now only allow clients to have one trust or company loan. This is huge because this bank was the best lender on the market, giving investors massive freedom to scale under one roof. And if other lenders start tightening their policies the same way, it's gonna get a lot harder to use this strategy to expand your borrowing capacity. But here's the good news, the strategy still works. You just need to know which lenders still allow it and how to structure your loans correctly. So if you're serious about building a large property portfolio, here's your action plan to get around these changes and still come out on top. Step 1, define your property goals. Be specific. How many properties do you want to own and by when? What's your why? Is it passive income, early retirement, or generational wealth? Step 2, assess your current borrowing position. Where are you right now? And how many properties do you own? What's your current borrowing capacity? Get this clarity before making any moves. Step 3, model out your growth plan. If you want to own 10 properties, map out how you'll get there. Which properties will be in your personal name and which will be in a trust. When will you make that transition? Step 4, build your advisory team. You need a broker who understands scaling strategies, an accountant who specializes in property investing and trust, and a buyer's agent who can buy property that fit your strategy, not just any property. These people become your partners in building wealth. Borrowing capacity isn't a fixed ceiling. It's a puzzle that can be solved with the right knowledge and strategy. Most investors stop at 3 properties because they don't know that these strategies exist. They think the game is over when really it's just the beginning. The trust structure isn't the only solution, but it is one of the most powerful tools available for investors who want to scale beyond the typical limits. If you're looking at building a property portfolio and want guidance on the right structure and strategy for your situation, that's exactly what we help investors with at Invest and Grow Property. If you'd like to have a conversation about your investing goals and how we can help, head to our website or reach out through the link in the description. And if you found this video helpful, remember to hit that like and subscribe button. See you in the next one.